I think when it comes to leadership and more in reference to disasters, natural disasters, there's a case that we can always learn how to deal with it better afterwards when we understand the effects more. We know exactly what it's going to hit. But in this case, I'd say there's probably three concepts that I would define that would help us be better prepared in the future if something like this was going to happen. And it kind of has to come from the leaders. It's a very top-down sort of structure because at the end of the day, a lot of people won't even know that something like this is going to strike, is going to happen. It's something that's formed in the ocean where you have hundreds of scientists monitoring it and creating warning systems that can tell the public and keep them informed. So I think something that can be done in the future, firstly, is better communication, especially from, for example, President Bush could have had better communication in terms of deciding which areas needed to be evacuated immediately. It also comes from heads of state and governors to inform the public of how serious this issue is. I think that in the future, communication needs to be more open and more honest. It's a case of when you're putting thousands of people's lives at risk or there's going to be this natural disaster, you have to give the public all the information and they have to make their informed decisions. You can't physically force anybody to evacuate, but you should give them the opportunity to make the decisions from the information that you have. I think in this case, there wasn't enough information given. It was heavily compared to previous hurricanes, such as Hurricane Camille, which was serious in, magnitude of and wind speed and similar things like that. But it actually didn't have a big range of effect. It only covered about 8 miles was the epicenter, whereas Katrina turned out to be 32 miles. And I think that yes, you need to compare it to something to give people an understanding, but also nowadays I think everything needs to be overplayed. There's more people, there's a large population. You can't just risk comparing it to other things. Then I would say the second thing that could be improved is you can't just giving the public the information sometimes just isn't enough. You can't just be like, oh well, I warned everyone, I'm the president. If they don't listen, they don't listen. That's as a leader of a country or a state, that's your job needs to be more than that. And I think in this case there was a severe lack of preparation and understanding of the systems in place to counteract the impacts of a hurricane or natural disasters. If you look at a lot of countries, especially like a lot of states, especially like Louisiana, that was affected by this, they had numerous flood prevention systems using a number of levees, but after the event, it turns out that the majority of Louisiana is actually below sea level, so these flood prevention systems had no impact and was actually the main cause of a lot of damage and deaths, and wasn't actually the hurricane itself. And I think as a leader and moving forward into the future, you have to keep evaluating your role and you can't get happy with what you're doing. You can't just be like, oh, well, I've spent, the last 6 months, I'm doing a good job, everyone likes me, blah, blah, blah. You have to keep making sure that you're improving. And reevaluation is a key concept in improving and developing your leadership style. You have to, if you're in a place where you are looking after millions of people and you're in, you influence thousands of people in different areas, you have to be able to go back and make sure that everything that is in place will actually work. Like I said before, it is tough to know that, there was these systems in place, but you have to constantly reevaluate. And this was one thing from this disaster, was that there was a system in place, but no one really checked out if it worked or not. So I think that's another thing that can maybe be improved in the future if this was to occur. So you have the communication, you have to go above and beyond. And I think that it's also, in the future, it's a learning process. You can't just not everyone's going to make the right decisions. Not everyone's going to, I'm sure if President Bush looked back on it now, he would have improved this or he would have improved that. But it's something where, in a case of, you have to be honest with everyone. You have to say, this we weren't prepared enough, but we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that the damage that's been done now can be improved. I know that there was millions, if not billions, of dollars funded back into Louisiana and Mississippi and Florida areas to improve the country and improve those areas. So I think the things that I would do in the future to improve the impacts of this overall would be communication and being open and honest and giving out all the information possible. Being prepared, but by being prepared, you need to do more than just listening and saying, yeah, we have these measures. You have to check and you have to evaluate that they actually will work, and you have to have a design in place that's going to show you the impacts that possibly might happen. And thirdly, you need to be yourself more open to growing and developing your leadership style. You can't just be like, this is what I am, this is what I'm doing. I've warned people, we have these systems in place. You have to keep growing, you have to keep learning. And even if it's not something that you do well originally, and like Hurricane Katrina was terrible and it wasn't dealt with in the right way, but you have to learn from that and move on and find a way to make sure that it doesn't happen again if another disaster occurs.